Thank you, Ken, for your most kind introduction. And of course, thank you, Don Allison, for arranging this spectacular 50-year reunion. And thanks to my granddaughter, Emma, a recent Summa graduate from the New School who set up this video. Thank you, Emma. You know, when Don Allison asked me to make some remarks at this 50-year reunion, I was ambivalent for several reasons. First, I was concerned that I would sound like one of those old-timers who pretended that we were more innovative, that we were smarter, bolder, we worked harder than those who followed us, that things were better in the good old days. Such nonsense. I was also concerned that this reunion would morph into a memorial service for those no longer with us or those right on the cusp. I was reminded of the story of the customer who went up into a restaurant. Upon entering, he asked to be seated, and the maitre d' said, no, there are no seats available. The customer, however, insisted on the table. The maitre d' then explained, we're overbooked. You have no reservation. It is not possible. Don't you know who I am? The maitre d' replied, no. Who were you? I was also ambivalent about this whole business of reunions. As Byron put it eloquently, when we two parted in silence and tears, half broken-hearted to sever for years, if I should meet thee after long years, how should I greet thee? In silence and tears. And I was distressed that you would notice my walker, my slowness of speech, my slurring of speech, and the quivering in my left hand. You would whisper amongst yourselves, he's changed. Parkinson's? My original draft had a question mark after the word Parkinson's. Now no more question mark. 1 heart attack, a pacemaker, 2 bypass surgeries, stents, 2 hip replacements, all on the top of Parkinson's junk. I remember that when I was 80, I went to my doctor and I explained that I had no short-term memory loss. My deductive skills were just fine. I could still figure out present value calculations in my head. He replied simply, just wait until you are 90. And then, and now, I am uneasy about my current vulnerabilities. It makes it impossible for me, face to face, to talk to you about old times, to talk to you about our families, to talk about remembrances. The vulnerabilities simply make perfunctory hugs and kisses too risky. Soon, however, I realized the truth, that my ambivalence about speaking to you simply reflected my overwhelming need to be loved and to be respected without any qualification from all of you, that I was the same as 50 years ago. But as a friend recently put it, you will soon be 93. Get over it already. But one thing I will not get over is what you have done. You and your successors simply raised $900 billion and invested those funds in world capital markets, pending the disbursement to poor countries. To what end, you may ask? I'll tell you what end. Life expectancy went way up. Fewer children died before the age of 5. Hundreds of millions of boys and girls, for the first time, went to school. Safe water, electric power became available, and fewer lived in absolute poverty. Far less starvation. Hundreds of millions more could read and write because of you. Fewer little girls needed to work knee-deep in rice fields, in mud fields. There was far less infant mortality, far less maternal deaths at childbirth. There was more democracy, more civil discourse. Hundreds of millions more simply had hope because of what you had done. In the 1980s, 2 billion people on our planet lived in absolute poverty. Now, less than $2 a day. Now only 500 million. In 1970, 280 million children under the age of 5 were underweight. Now it's down to 80 million. Life expectancy in India went from 41 years in 1958 to 65 years today. Child mortality worldwide in 1960 was 22%. It's now only 4%. That's to what end? And you might tell that to your grandchildren and to your children and to your friends who needle you about what you did because you are part of the investment banking establishment. The bottom line, there would have been no direct foreign investment or commercial bank lending had you not first provided the resources needed for infrastructure, for roads and airports and rail and ports and schools and hospitals, for health centers, for agricultural finance, for dams, for disease control, for power grids, for safe water supply, matters rarely financed by the private sector. But you will not get credit. Your name will never be recognized because immortality is mostly reserved for writers and poets, for artists and for composers, for those who leave behind the evidence of their work with their names attached, and whose works are loved and seen and heard over and over and over. Verdi's La Pensiero, Puccini's duets, Mahler's adagios will bring chills forever. Just listen for a moment to Angela Giorgio, who sings Visi d'Arte. not have her legacy. Your name will not be attached, though without you the enormous changes for a better world would not have happened. Children simply would not have been born. That little kid flying a kite in Afghanistan, that little girl bent over, hunched over, washing clothes on stones in a stream filled with mud in Peru. They both owe their births to you. Their very existence they owe to you. One day they will work together, however, at Mayo Clinic or in Geneva, and they will find a cure for cancer. That is your immortality. It is of a different kind than Angela's. It is silent, unknown, no medals, no chills, no recognition, no name attached, just no more cancer. And there is another development which reflects on what you did, rarely acknowledged. Those who sit in this room show the world how a country could intermediate another country's savings to purchase goods and services from a third country, which would be used to facilitate the economic growth and the economy of all countries. You provided the indispensable finance, the link to facilitate trade among nations, to integrate the economies and the output of the peoples of the world. You are the linchpin, the sine qua non of globalization. Irreversible. At discretion. Suppose I'm wrong. And suppose it is reversible. Giles Harvey in the New York Times recently quoted Ishiguro's acceptance speech for the Nobel Prize in Literature. Ishiguro spoke the unthinkable. I woke up recently to the realization I have been living some years in a bubble. I realized that my world, a civilized place, filled with iconic, liberal-minded people, was in fact much smaller than I ever imagined, that the most unstoppable advice of liberal humanitarian values that I had taken for granted since my childhood may have been an illusion. Thank you. I share Ishiguro's angst. I fear that our liberalism may have been checkmated. We have seen political movements to the right throughout the world, not just in North Korea or Iran or Yemen or Syria, but in Greece of all places, the Philippines, Poland, the Stans, Cambodia, Venezuela, Hungary, yes, even France. Beggar thy neighbor. Do it alone. Isolate. Brexit. Punishing tariffs. Restrict the flow of savings to within one's own borders. Limit immigration. Subsidize domestic investment. Penalize foreign investment. Impose quotas and taxes. The world-elected conspiratory theorists whose explicit goals are to destroy not just the separation of powers, but the very existence of an independent legislature and judiciary, the underpinnings of democracy, the right to vote. The bedrock principle of all of these policies is to insulate, perhaps isolate is a more accurate word, one's own country from the foreign influence of ideas, of trade, of external financial resources, all of which are unfortunately considered a weakening of the purity of society. That is a direct confrontation with globalization and the free and open transfer of people and financial resources between nation states and individuals. But there is still another matter which has limited now the independence of nation states, whose policies increasingly are controlled from Moscow or Beijing. If you want and need our oil, pay for it in rubles and leave to us the execution of your foreign affairs, else that railway across Africa or South America will not be built. You will argue that these are temporary aberrations, that we have seen this push and pull before, which do not in any way threaten the basic lessons of morality of Moses and Plato, which have been burnished over the last several centuries by John Stuart Mill and Jefferson, who taught that society will reward the truthful, that human beings are rational, that they are liberal animals. We celebrated the age of enhancement, the age of enlightenment. We rejected Hobbes and Machiavelli. We are much better off now, you argue. We point out with pride that each structural change, beginning with the violent French and American revolutions in the late 18th century, through the social revolutions of 1848, even through the assassinations of royalty in the late 19th century, to the dissolution of monarchies at the end of World War I, through the balancing of the 1930s in the social structure of the United States, through the Civil Rights Acts in the 1960s, every society became fairer, more liberal, more sharing. It was with pride and no sense of embarrassment that I therefore could quote John Donne, and did so. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never know too soon for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. But perhaps now the question I would put for a later speech, not today's, is whether the body politic would not identify with John Donne, but would rather identify with the words of Carl Sandburg. Hog butcher for the world, toy maker, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with the railways and the nation's freight handler, stormy, husky, brawling city of the broad shoulders, fierce as a dog, with tongue lapping for action, cunning as a savage, pitted against the wilderness, bareheaded, shoveling, wrecking, planning, building, breaking, rebuilding. The question haunts whether the teaching of the past therefore have already been vanquished. I hope not. The great debate, which policies will win out, is not over. Beggar thy neighbor or share with thy neighbor. Hegemony or diversity. Forgiveness or punishment. Admit to mistakes or failure, or just lie and cheat over and over and over again. I suspect that our grandchildren will still be debating these matters. Let me now conclude with some personal remarks. When I came to the bank, I hardly knew a stock from a bond. You all protected me from foolishness. You let me take the credit for what you developed. You covered up my mistakes. You let me introduce innovative ways to evaluate risk and to raise resources, as if they were my ideas. When I left the bank, you were working on that magic zero coupon bond with no maturity. And your successors are still trying. You let me pretend that because I was the public face of the Treasury Department, that I understood the cash flow of swaps. No, 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 only Lester Siegel and Philip Spray did. You permitted me to ignore administrative and bureaucratic management matters, indispensable stuff for which I was totally unequipped and disinterested in handling. In short, you permitted me to love going to work every day for 2 decades. All that goes way beyond thank you. When I left the bank 35 years ago, in a letter to all of you, I quoted the English poet Robert Bridges. I will not let thee go. I hold thee by too many bands. Thou may sayest farewell, and lo, I have thee by the hands. I will not let thee go. It still applies to all of you. I can only hope that you will email me and share your life. And although I would have preferred to meet with you face to face, email is probably much better than a perfunctory hug or a handshake. Don Allison has distributed these remarks with my email address. A word, finally, about those who informed all of us, and whose names mostly have already disappeared. Their names have been forgotten. Those whose names will never appear in the history books. Those whose names soon, probably in a generation, will not be spoken again out loud, publicly, except for this one last time. Burke Knapp, Bernie Bell, Shahid Hussein, Munir Benjank, Dennis Rickett, Bill Diamond, Mohammed Shoab, Seymour Wells, Raymond Cope, Joe Urich, Jocelyn Radifera, Ray Dealey, Del Harris, and William Clark, Bill Van Saxveld, Hugh Scott, Ronnie Brachus, Ray Goodman, David Hopper, Monty Udelman, John Adler, Ben Prince, John DeBook, Haritoshi Sawajima, Lester Nurick, Peter Cargill, Sheldon Rappaport, Y.L. Chang, Victor Chang, Francis Poole, my predecessor Bob Cavanaugh, Mahbub El-Haq, Roger Chiffonnier, George Gabriel, Ibrahim Shahata, Warren Baum, Hans Sigmayer, Ernie Cassie. Thank you.